Hello everyone, my name is GYIMAH ADDAE Samuel. GYIMAH ADDAE Samuel, guys for short. And today we are back here treating business mathematics, specifically break-even analysis. Break-even analysis. This is a topic most of us find it difficult to understand and also to treat in examinations or other quizzes. So today we are coming to treat break-even analysis. What do we mean by break-even analysis? Break-even analysis can be defined as the minimum level of sales revenue, or unit of goods that an organization must meet or produce to cover all costs. To determine this level, cost must be determined appropriately and accurately. Cost must be determined and defined accurately and appropriately. To determine cost accurately, the cost of every factor of production, and when we say factor of production, it consists of land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur, must be accounted for. To determine cost accurately, factors of production or cost of every factor of production must be accounted for. So the objective of break-even analysis is to find the level of output at which cost equals revenue. The objective of break-even analysis is to find the level of output at which cost equals revenue. Requires estimation of fixed costs, variable cost, and revenue. So this is to say that in our break-even analysis, we are going to see some terms here, including that of fixed cost. We are going to see that of fixed cost, variable cost, and revenue. These are some terms we'll be seeing as we progress. So what then is a fixed cost? Fixed costs are costs that continue even if no units are produced. They are costs that continue even if no units are produced. So when we say something is fixed, it's already there. So for example, we have depreciation, we have taxes, we have debts. They are all fixed costs. Variable costs are costs that vary with the volume of units produced. They vary with the volume of units produced. So now when it comes to break-even analysis, there are some decisions that one has to make. So we term this as decision-making and break-even analysis. So one, you ask yourself, how many units must be sold to break even? How many units must be sold to achieve a target profit? How will profits and or break-even volume be affected if fixed cost, variable cost, and total revenue increased or reduced? So now, there are some key terminologies here we are going to look at when it comes to break-even analysis. So first of all, break-even point. You have to know what break-even point is. So the point at which a company makes neither a profit or loss. So break-even point is a point which a company makes neither a profit or loss. We all know the meaning of neither. So they don't make profit nor they don't make any loss. So that is total revenue is equal to total cost. So what this simply means is that break-even point is the total revenue equals total cost. Total revenue equals total cost. So now we also move on to contribution per unit. As I said, the break-even point is a point at which a company makes neither a profit or loss, which is given to be total revenue equals total cost. Now we move on to contribution per unit. Contribution per unit is sales price minus the variable cost per unit. Sales price minus the variable cost per unit. It measures the contribution made by each item of output to the fixed cost and profit of organization. Don't worry, I know me reading, most of you are confused. But when we get to the grounds, when we start solving, you get to understand that break even is not a big deal. So contribution per unit is given by price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Margin of safety. Margin of safety. Margin of safety, a measure in which the budgeted volume of sales is compared with the volume of sales required to break even. A measure in which the budgeted volume of sales is compared with the volume of sales required to break even. So the formula for margin of safety is budgeted volume of sales minus break even volume. Budgeted volume of sales minus break even volume. So this is the margin of safety. This is the margin of safety. So now we are coming to dive into break even. So now we are coming to start. All what we started was terminologies, key factors, and what you have to know before you start with your formulas. Now we are done. So let's move into what break even actually is when it comes to the calculation aspect. So now the break even formula. The break even formula. So break even volume can be determined mathematically or graphically. So now let's state the formula here. So this is the formula for break even. This is the formula for break even. So your fixed cost all over price per unit minus variable cost per unit. So your fixed cost on price per unit minus variable cost per unit. This is the formula for break even. This is the formula for break even. You have to know that this formula is used to determine the break even for single items only. This formula is used to determine the break even for single items only. So now we will have to solve an example here. we having that of our formula, because our main concern is how to solve questions under break-even. So there's an example here we have to solve that will give us an idea on how this break-even formula is used. So Auntie Araba sells powder. Auntie Araba sells powder in a shop around the corner. Auntie Araba sells powder in a shop around the corner. If her monthly fixed cost is 1,800, and as I said, when you are given a question, the first thing you have to do is to list your apparatus. So her fixed cost, her monthly fixed cost is 1,800. Her monthly fixed cost is 1,800 cedis, and her variable cost per unit is 6.75 cedis. Is 6.75 cedis. Determine the number of powder Auntie Araba must sell to break even if a biscuit sells at 9.25 cedis. 9.25 cedis. So here it says determine the number of powder Auntie Araba must sell to break even if a powder sells at 9.25. So the 9.25 here is that of the price per unit. So we state it down. It's part of our apparatus. So price per unit is 9.25. When dealing with mass, we don't say 9.25. It's 9.25. 9.25. So we have our apparatus here. So now what do? We state our formula. We already have our formula here. So in short terms, you can represent this as F over P minus V. So we have our fixed cost being F here to be 1,800 cedis. 1,800 cedis. We have our price per unit to be 9.25, and we subtract that of our variable cost per unit from our price per unit being 9.25. So we subtract that of 6.75 cedis. So now we get 720 powders. 720 powders. So now this is what we have. So when given a question, you state your apparatus. After stating your apparatus, you come and state your formula being fixed cost on price per unit minus variable cost per unit. Then you fix it in so that you are good to go. There is another question here. This is where one has to play smart. You have to play smart here. The head has to work, but don't worry, gas is here for you. So determine the value of sales at break even. Determine the value of sales at break even if fixed cost 10,000 cedis. Direct labor 1.50 per unit, material 0.75 per unit, and selling price 4.00 per unit. Don't be confused here. Why? Because in this question, the variable cost wasn't given, but rather factors of production was given. Direct labor is a factor of production. Material is a factor of production. So now, how then do we go ahead to find our break even? It's simple. You have to first state your formula, which is the fixed cost represented by F divided by price per unit cost, price per unit represented by P, and the variable cost represented by V. But this is a case whereby variable cost wasn't given in the question. How then do we solve this question? We have to fix our apparatus into the formula. So now we have 10,000 cedis being our fixed cost. We have 4 cedis per unit being our selling price or price per unit cost or price per unit. Minus our variable cost. But the variable cost wasn't given. So what do? It's simple. We have to add the factors of production in the question to get our variable cost. We have to add the factors of production in our question to get our variable cost. So now, the factors of production here, we start with direct labor. Direct labor is 1.50. 1.50 plus material, which is 0.75. This is how to go about this to get our variable cost. So now when we do this, we'll get 5,714 units. 5,714 units. So with this question, the variable cost wasn't given, but factors of production were given. So we added the 2 factors of production to get our variable cost, and we fixed it into the formula. So this is how to go about such questions. Alright, so you can be given the same question to determine the value of sales at break even in monetary terms. So when given such question and you are being asked to determine the break even in monetary terms, what you do, the formula changes. So the formula becomes that of fixed cost on 1 minus variable cost divided by price per unit. This is the formula when you are asked to determine the break even or the value of sales at break even in monetary terms. Well, so what you have to do is to fix in your apparatus. So your fixed cost here is 10,000 cedis. You bring your 1 now minus V, variable cost divided by P. Variable cost wasn't stated here, so as we did in the previous example, you add the 2 factors of production. You add the 2 factors of production. You add the 2 factors of production here to get your variable cost. Then now we divide it by our selling price, which is our price per unit. So this is how you go ahead to solve for value of sales at break even in monetary terms. So when you do this calculation, you get that of 22,857.14. 22,857.14. So this is in monetary terms, not in units. This is in monetary terms. So now we move on to multiple product break-even analysis. The previous examples and the previous explanation we gave was channeled at single product break-even analysis. So the formula we gave being fixed cost divided by price per unit minus variable cost per unit is all directed towards single product break-even analysis. Now we move on to multiple product or multi-product break-even analysis. So multiple product formula. This is the formula for multiple products when it comes to break-even analysis. The first formula that was given was that of the single product. When finding for single product, that is the formula, that is the F over P minus V. But this is for multiple product, and this is what you have to pay attention to. No matter what, you have to listen to this very carefully because this is very confusing. But we are going to make this simple for all of us. We're going to make this simple for all of us. So I'll start by explaining what goes into this formula. So the F here is our fixed cost. The F here is our fixed cost, and as you already know, the P is our price per unit. The P is our price per unit. The V is our variable cost per unit. The V is our variable cost per unit. The W is percent each product is of total dollar sales. Percent each product is of total dollar sales. Percent each product is of total dollar sales. And the I here, the WI, the I there represents something. It's each product. The I represents each product. The I represents each product. So each product. Don't let this formula confuse you because we have a way of going about this formula. So I'll plead with you to write this formula somewhere in order not to confuse yourself someday. This is the formula for multiple products when it comes to break-even analysis. As I had already explained, the figures or the variables here, that of the F, what the F stands for, what the V stands for, what the I stands for, and the W. It has been explained. So now we move on. We move on to a practical question. We move on to an example. Steven, in the example, no. All right. So, multiple product break-even analysis. We stated the formula for the multiple product, and this is the formula. Now, how do we get this? The fixed cost has already been given, and it's in per month. It's in per month. So the fixed cost will be here, and as far as it being in per month, you multiply the fixed cost by 12 because we have 12 months in a year. We ask ourselves, how then do we get this, the denominator? The denominator is centered here. We are going to work this to get that of the denominator. And please, don't panic. It's very simple. Have it in mind that whenever such question is given to you, this is how the table is going to be. Item will be stated for you. The selling price is constant. It will be given to you. The variable cost will be given to you. And the annual sales will be given to you as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4 has been stated. It has already been stated. How then do we find our variable cost divided by our price per unit? How then do we find 1 minus bracket variable cost divided by price per unit? How then do we find our annual forecasted sales in dollars? How do we find our weighted I, the WI? And how then do we find our weighted contribution? GYIMAH ADDAE Samuel Gas is going to show you how this is done. And this is going to help you calculate that of the multiple product breaking even analysis. So now we have our product or our items here. So let's start with sardine, or some of you say sardine. Some of you say sardine, but I'll say sardine. So we have the selling price for sardine to be 2 cedis 95 pesos, which is 2.95 cedis. We have its variable cost, which is represented by VIN, to be 1.25 cedis. And we have its annual sales to be 7,000. Now, how then do we find VIN divided by P? VIN divided by P. We know that VIN stands for variable cost, and we know that P stands for selling price. So what then do? We divide our variable cost for sardine, which is 1.25 by 2.95. 1.25, we divide it by 2.95, and here we will get 0.42. We get 0.42 when we divide our variable cost of the sardine, which is 1.25, with that of the selling price for sardine, which is 2.95. We've gotten our VP. So have it in mind how the VP is being found. Now, we subtract VP divided by P from 1. VP divided by P from 1. So we will subtract this from 1. We will subtract this from 1, and we will get 0.58. This is very simple. We get 0.58. Yes. So now we have our annual forecasted sales. We have our annual forecasted sales. How then do we find our annual forecasted sales? How then do we find our annual forecasted sales? So how then do we find our annual forecasted sales? To find our annual forecasted sales, we have to multiply that of our annual sale for by the selling price for sardine. So we multiply that of 7,000 by the price of sardine 2.95. We multiply 7,000, which is the annual sales, by the selling price for sardine 2.95. And here we get 20,650. We will get 20,650 cedis for annual forecasted sales of sardine. Please, the annual forecasted sales, you multiply that of the annual sales by the selling price. You multiply that of the annual sales by the selling price. We move on to WI. We move on to WI. But without of the WI, we will come back and visit it later, because we have to get the sum of the annual forecasted sales before we can go ahead to find that of the WI and the weighted contribution. So now, as I said, with the variable cost, it will already be given. The annual sales will be given in the question. That of the variable divided by price won't be given in the question. So So you have to divide the variable cost represented by bin by the selling price to get your bin over your bin on P. And now 1 minus bracket bin on P is gotten by subtracting the answer you had for the bin on P from 1 to get your answer. Your annual forecasted sales, you multiply your annual sales by your selling price, which is the P, to get your annual forecasted sales. So this is how you apply to the items left. So you can take your book, you can take your jotter, and as I write the answers there, you can also take your calculator, start solving to cross-check with that of mine if you are on the right side. So now we have calculated that of our annual forecasted sales for all the items. Calculated the 1 minus bracket bin over P for all the items, and we've calculated the bin on P for all the items. Okay, so now we have that of our annual forecasted sales, and its total is 46,300. Its total is 46,300. As I said, you can't go ahead to find the WI without getting your annual forecasted sales. After getting your annual forecasted sales, you get its total. So we added all the annual forecasted sale of the various items, and we had 46,300. Now we go ahead to find this our WI as stated here in the formula. Go ahead to find this in the formula. So now how then do we find this? You take one item, you take one annual forecasted sale of each of the items. So starting with sardine, the annual forecasted sale of sardine is 20,650. So when you take the 20,650, then you divide it by 46,300 to get your WI. You take the annual forecasted sale of each item, then you divide it by the total annual forecasted sale. So if we are to divide 20,650 cedis by 46,300, we are getting 0.446. If we divide this by this, that's the annual forecasted sale of sardine, with 46,300, the total annual forecasted sale, we'll get 0.446. So now this is how to calculate for the WI. So now take your pen or pencil with your calculator and with your jotter and calculate that of the WI with what I just said. And I said you take that of the annual forecasted sale, which is 20,650 for sudden, and you divide it by the total annual forecasted sale, which is the 46,300 cedis. So now I'll go ahead to list that of my figures. You can also take your calculator, your jotter and your pen, and you can also solve something. So these are my figures. After dividing each annual forecasted sale by the total forecasted sales, which is the 46,300, and taking each annual forecasted sale. After getting the figures, what you have to do is to add them and get its total. Note this: don't leave your figures in 2 decimal places, but rather leave your figures in 3 decimal places. Leave your figures in 3 decimal places. So there won't be any need for you to run this up, add it to this to get 0.45. No. But rather leave it in 3 decimal places. So you leave it to be 0.446, 0.121, 0.167, 0.081, 0.1855. So after getting this, you add them to get your total. So now, as I said, there is no need to run this up. You just have to leave it in 3 decimal places. After that, you add it. Now, when you add this, there's nothing like 1.000. So when you add this, you are getting 1. When you add this, you are getting 1, which is a simple answer you are going to get. So when you add or sum all this up, you get 1. Note again, don't run the WI up. And the WI is gotten by taking each annual forecasted sale of each item and dividing it by the total annual forecasted sale. And that is how we got this. And as I said, don't run this up. Leave it in 3 decimal places. After that, you add it to get its total. Now, our weighted contribution. All this here, the denominator of the formula is what is meant by the weighted contribution. So all what we did here, we will be climaxing it here under the weighted contribution. So please pay attention to this carefully. How then do we find our weighted contribution? Now, before we go ahead to find our weighted contribution, we have our WI and we have our 1 minus BREAKEVEN divided by P. So we will multiply this by this. We will multiply this by this. So to make it simple for us, I'll state it under here. So this is how we will go ahead to find our weighted contribution. So we multiply this by this. That is the 1 minus bracket V divided by P. So when you take that of sudden, you take the 0.446 and you multiply it by the 0.58. You take the 0.446 and you multiply it by the 0.58, and I've made it simple here for all. That is the WI brackets multiplying that of 1 minus bracket V divided by P, and this is simple as A, B, C, D. So now I'll go ahead to calculate for the first item, which is the sudden. So when you multiply, you get 259. You get 0.259. 0.259. So please, I'm begging you, take note of the approach you take in getting your figures in this table. The approach you take in getting your figures in this table. So you can calculate with me so that we find the rest of the figures for the weighted contribution. So these are the figures for the weighted contribution. As I said, with the weighted contribution, you multiply this by this. You multiply this by this. That is the WI and the 1 minus bracket V divided by P. And these are the figures you will get. So we also have to go ahead to find the total of this. So when you add this, you get 0.625. When you add the total, you get the total, you get 0.625. So now we went ahead to calculate the VP, that's the V divided by P. We also went ahead to calculate the 1 minus bracket V over P, which aided us to calculate the annual forecasted sales. And as I said, with calculating that of the annual forecasted sales, you do what? You multiply that of your annual sales by your selling price, or by your price per unit, to get your annual forecasted sales. After getting your annual forecasted sales, you add all to get your total annual forecasted sales, which we had here to be 46,300. After getting the 46,300, we go ahead to find our WI. And now we said, before we can get our WI, we have to take each annual forecasted sale of each item and divide it by the total annual forecasted sale, which is 46,300. And we did absolutely what we were asked to do, absolutely what the formula tells us to do, and we had our figures here. And now we were told that before you can go ahead to find that of the weighted contribution, you have to calculate the total. You have to sum the WI up to get the total of the WI, and we did just as we have to, and we had 1. So we moved on to the weighted contribution, and now we were told that before you can go ahead to get your weighted contribution, you have to take each WI here, and you multiply it by each 1 minus bracket V divided by P. And that was what we did here to get our weighted contribution. So the figures are 0.259, 0.075, 0.117, 0.054, 0.120. Yes, so that was what we had. After getting the figures, we added them to get the sum of weighted contribution. The sum of weighted contribution. And as I said, this is where we will be climaxing the whole table. And now after getting your weighted contribution, you add them. You add the figures you got. And the sum here represents the denominator. The sum here represents the denominator. Someone will say, Someone will say, What we've just done here, the sum we got, the total we got, represents that of the denominator. It represents that of the denominator. So please take note of this. So now, if it represents that of the denominator, let's go ahead and fix it in our formula. So now the formula was given, and now we said the total of the weighted contribution represents that of the denominator. That was all what we were calculating for, and the fixed cost has been given to be 3,500. Now you don't go ahead to punch this into your calculator. As the question stated, the fixed cost is 3,500 per month, and it being in per month, we know, you and I know, that we have 12 months in a year. So what you do is that you multiply that of your fixed cost by 12. You multiply your fixed cost by 12 and you divide it by the weighted contribution, the total of the weighted contribution, and there you get 67,200. $67,200, and this is an example under the multiple product. So using 1 minute, I'll sum this whole thing up. As I said, the question will be given, the fixed cost will be stated, the items will be stated for you, the selling price will be stated for you, the variable cost will be stated for you, and the annual sale will be stated for you. Before you can find your V over P or your V on P, as we are to say, you have your variable cost representing V and your selling price represented by P. So you divide the variable cost, each variable cost, by each selling price to get that of your V on P. Now you subtract each V on P from 1 to get your 1 minus bracket V on P. With that of the annual forecasted sale, you multiply each annual sale of each item by each price item. You multiply each annual sale of each item by the price of each item to get your annual forecasted sale. Now, after doing that for each item, you come and sum it up to get your total annual forecasted sale, and that was what we did here. And now to get your WI, you take each annual forecasted sale for each item and you divide it by the total annual forecasted sale. And now this is where we climaxed everything. That is the weighted contribution. You multiply the WI, each WI, by each 1 minus brackets V on P, as seen here. So you multiply this by this to get your weighted contribution. And now after getting each weighted contribution for each item, you calculate or by summing them up to get your total weighted contribution. And your total weighted contribution represents that of your denominator for the formula that was stated. And now someone will be wondering why we multiplied the fixed cost by 12. We multiplied it by 12 because the question stated that 3,500 per month, and we know that there are 12 months in a year. So you multiply the 3,500 by 12 and you divide it by the what? By the total of the weighted contribution to get your answer. This is the multi-product break-even analysis. Under break-even analysis, we have what we call margin of safety. Margin of safety. The difference between budgeted or actual sales and the break-even point. That is what we call margin of safety. The difference between budgeted or actual sales and the break-even point. The margin of safety may be expressed in unit or revenue terms. It may be expressed in unit or revenue terms. It shows the amount by which sales can drop before a loss will be incurred. It shows the amount by which sales can drop before a loss will be incurred. So now, we are going to use formulas in calculating margin of safety. We are going to use formulas in calculating margin of safety. So, we are going to solve an example under the margin of safety. We are going to solve an example under the margin of safety. So, using the following data, calculate the break-even point, contribution per unit, and margin of safety in units. Using the following data, calculate the break-even point, contribution per unit, and margin of safety in units. So, this is what we are going to use. Selling price, which is 50 cedis. Variable cost, which is 40 cedis. Fixed cost, which is 70,000 cedis. And budgeted sales, so this is what we are going to use, but we have to know the formulas. So now we are first going to calculate for break-even point. We are first going to calculate for that of what? The break-even. The break-even. So that of the break-even. So we have what we are going to use here. But the question asks us to calculate break-even point, contribution per unit, and margin of safety. But we have to have it in mind that before we can go ahead to find our break-even point, we have to find our contribution per unit. Because our contribution per unit is the selling price minus variable cost. It's the selling price minus variable cost. So contribution per unit is the selling price minus the variable cost, which is 50 minus 40, giving us 10 cedis. So now we've gotten one answer for what? For one term the question asks us to. Because the question asks us to find contribution per unit, the break-even, and the margin safety in units. So now we've gotten our contribution per unit to be 10 cedis. Now let's go ahead to find our break-even point, because we couldn't have found our break-even point without finding our contribution per unit. Now, the break-even point, as we did earlier on, was fixed cost divided by price per unit minus our variable cost. And this term, being the price per unit minus variable cost, can be termed as what? The contribution per unit. Because we had our selling price to be 50 and we had our variable cost to be 40. So we have already gotten our price per unit minus our variable cost per unit to be 10. We already have it here. So we divide our fixed cost, as stated in the question, to be 70,000. We divide it by 10 cedis. We divide it by 10 cedis to get 7,000 units. To get 7,000 units. To get 7,000 units. So now we have our contribution per unit, and that aided us to get our break-even point. So now the question goes ahead to tell us to find our margin of safety. Our margin of safety. And margin of safety, our margin of safety is the budgeted sales minus the break-even point. Budgeted sales minus break-even point. The margin of safety is budgeted sales minus break-even point. And they are all in units. So, margin of safety, please state it down. Margin of safety is budgeted sales minus break-even point. Margin of safety is budgeted sales minus break-even point. So we had our budgeted sales to be 7,500 units, and we had our break-even point to be 7,000 units. So when you subtract that of the 7,000 from the 7,500, you get 500 units. And please, the margin of safety we had here is in unit. It's in unit. A question can go ahead to tell you to find margin of safety in monetary terms. To find margin of safety in monetary terms. When a question is given to you to find margin of safety in monetary terms, you first find the margin of safety in units. After finding the margin of safety in units, you multiply the answer you get by your selling price. You multiply the answer you get by your selling price to get the margin of safety in monetary terms. To get the margin of safety in monetary terms. So if we are to find the margin of safety here, this is in units. So if we are to find the margin of safety in monetary terms, so we had our margin of safety in unit to be 500 units. So now if you are asking a question to find the margin of safety in monetary terms, you multiply the answer you had here for the unit by your selling price to get that of your margin of safety in monetary terms. So when we multiply our selling price, which is 50 cedis, to 500 units, we get 25,000. And since it's in monetary terms, we bring the cedi sign. We bring the cedi sign. So 25,000 cedis. 25,000 cedis, 25,000 cedis. Whilst this is in units, so 500 units. Thank you. This is for margin of safety. We move on to target profit. Target profit. We move on to target profit. Sometimes firms do not just want to break even. They may want a target profit. In that case, contribution per unit will need to cover profit as well as fixed costs. Required profit is accordingly treated as an addition to fixed costs. Let's solve an example under target profit. So, using the following data, calculate the level of sales required to generate a profit of 10,000. So, this is the targeted profit. So, this is the targeted profit given in the question. So, it says using the following data. Which data? So, selling price here is 35 cedis. Selling price here is 35 cedis. Variable cost is 20 cedis. Variable cost is 20 cedis and fixed cost is 50,000. So now we move on to calculate for our targeted profit. It says calculate the level of sales required to generate a profit. So we are calculating the sales that we are going to incur to get our profit. So what do you have to do first? We have to find our contribution. We have to find our contribution by subtracting that of the variable cost from the selling price as we did earlier on. So when we subtract this from this, we will get that of 15 cedis. And subtract the variable cost from the selling price, you get 15 cedis. You get that of 15 cedis. Now, level of sales required to generate profit of 10,000. How then do we calculate for this? Such a need must be treated as a fixed cost. So now we have a fixed cost of 50,000 and we've been given a profit of 10,000 in the question. So now what then do? We can't just throw away that of the 10,000. We have to add that of the 10,000 to the 50,000. So this therefore becomes our fixed cost. Although a fixed cost has been given to be 50,000, you have to add the amount stated in the question, which is the 10,000, to the 50,000. Then you divide it by the contribution, which is that of the selling price and the variable cost, the difference of the selling price and the variable cost. And we did that and we had that of 15 cedis. So when you do this calculation, you get 4,000 units. When you do this, you get 4,000 units. Therefore, the firm will need to sell 4,000 units to not only break even, but to also make a target profit of 10,000 cedis. This is where our lesson for break-even analysis comes to an end. My name is GYIMAH ADDAE Samuel, GAS for short. Thank you.